This is Bridgeman-Rutledge, and this is assignment 3.3. So arousal. Arousal refers to the intensity of someone's behaviour. Somatic arousal is the changing of the state of the body when someone is aroused. This can be shown in the form of changing of heart rate, which can increase, along with breathing rate and blood pressure. Cognitive arousal relates to the mind and how it thinks when it's aroused. An example of this would be moment-to-moment changes when thinking negatively. If arousal is positive, it will encourage an athlete to do good and have a positive effect on the performance. An example of this would be a coach talking to a player before a game, hyping them up for a game where it's needed, such as rugby. If arousal is negative, then it will have a negative effect on performance and can cause cognitive arousal in the form of worry. An example of this would be the crowd booing, which would have booing an athlete, which would have a negative effect on performance, making the athlete worry and more likely to make mistakes. So the drive theory is a theory which suggests that there's a positive correlation between arousal and performance. It suggests that if arousal increases, so will the level of performance, and that a relationship is directly proportional. However, the quality of performer also can rely on how well a skill is learned by an athlete. An example of this is if you have a more skilled or experienced athlete taking a penalty in a high pressure situation, they're more likely to score. There can also be a variation in arousal. An example of this would be a defender who isn't used to taking penalties, who will experience a much higher level of arousal, but as they will feel more pressure as they aren't used to the skill of taking penalties as much as, say, a striker would be, and therefore would be more likely to make a mistake. Novice learners who aren't used to performing a certain skill in a high pressure situation will have high arousal levels and see a decrease in performance from this arousal. An advanced learner can handle higher levels of pressure or arousal without it having a negative effect on their performance. A criticism of this theory is that they don't take into account how advanced athletes fail in high arousal situations. An example of this would be John Terry when he missed a penalty in the Champions League final by slipping over in the final and losing the game for his team, and he succumbed to pressure and made a massive mistake. So the inverted U theory is a theory that suggests that an athlete's concentration will be limited if their arousal is too low. This theory states that there's an optimal arousal which can be reached where athletes' performance will be maximised as the concentration is high, allowing information to be absorbed and allows accurate decisions to be made. This theory suggests that if an athlete becomes over-aroused, then their field of attention will begin to narrow, and this will have a negative effect on performance. This over-arousal could be caused by too much pressure on an athlete to perform well. However, in different sports, different amounts of arousal are required. For example, rugby, large amounts of arousal are required and needed, as it's a very aggressive sport, as well as something like golf, where you have to be more calm and focused, will require less amounts of arousal. A criticism of this theory is that someone isn't likely to have a smooth decline in performance when the arousal is massively increased. We are likely to see a massive drop in performance through something like a catastrophe or a large mistake. Leading on to the catastrophe theory. This suggests that as arousal increases, the performance increases until a point is reached where a catastrophe occurs and the performance massively decreases to a low level. However, this theory, we see that the catastrophe can be recovered after a large performance decrease, but it takes time to increase back to the higher performance level that an athlete was performing at before the catastrophe occurred. This is shown when Mo Farah fell over during a race and got back up and was able to recover and win the race and recovered his catastrophe. If the catastrophe isn't recovered, the performance level will continue to drop to the lowest level. a criticism of this theory is that someone could maybe be able to completely recover a mistake and immediately reach the performer level they were at before this mistake. An example of this would be Son, the 1,000-meter swimmer world record holder, who had a full start but then went on to win the race, breaking a world record. Anxiety. Anxiety is a negative experience in which can be caused by worry or apprehension. An example of something that could give anxiety is the fear of failing in a competitive situation. Cognitive anxiety is the form of anxiety which has a negative effect on performance. This could occur in a big game where negative thoughts may come into an athlete's head as they as they have a fear of losing the game. However, top athletes should be able to block out these thoughts and not let it affect their performance. State anxiety is the physiological and psychological arousal when someone becomes nervous. State anxiety is the physical and mental state of being anxious. It is when there is a cognitive response to negative thinking and a physical response to a situation. An example of this would be sweating when nervous. This can be caused by situational factors, but people with higher levels of trait anxiety will experience state anxiety at a much more intense rate and much more often. Somatic anxiety is the physical component of anxiety, such as an increase in blood pressure and heart rate. Having cognitive anxiety can lead to somatic anxiety, and during somatic anxiety is when thoughts may become physically displayed. An example of this would be an athlete before a game, when an athlete is nervous, so they may start to sweat more. Trait anxiety is the stable trait found in people that is ingrained in people's personality. However, everyone has different levels of anxiety to different extents. Trait anxiety is obtained by genetics. An example of this would be someone with trait anxiety would be someone who is frequently anxious in most situations. Trait anxiety can be shown when people are anxious doing different sports, such as the experiment which we did in class to see who was more anxious when doing different sports. The three sports we tried were football, netball, and basketball. By giving a score out of 5 of how nervous you were when you were playing each sport, we have found that the girls were more confident playing netball, which is a sport which they're more experienced in, whereas the boys were more confident playing football, which is a sport which they're more experienced in to a higher level. If an athlete has higher anxiety levels, they're more likely to make a large mistake. This can be linked to the catastrophe theory, where too high levels of arousal causes a catastrophe. So the parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system are under anxiety and stress. So when anxiety and stress occurs, the sympathetic nervous system will be stimulated and with an elevated heart rate. When in this state of anxiety, the parasympathetic nervous system will try to control our heart rate and bring our body back to equilibrium. A sporting example of this could be just before a player goes out on a pitch, or just before a 100-meter race, where their sympathetic nervous system will massively elevate their heart rate. So some examples of this: when the parasympathetic nervous system is working at a higher level, the heart rate will be slower, the digestion will be occurring, and we also see the eyes and the pupils will be constricted, and the bladder will be contracting more frequently. The sympathetic nervous system, when stimulated, the eyes will be dilated. We also see a massive increase in heart rate and breathing rate, and digestion will be inhibited. Factors that cause anxiety: fear of failure, such as losing a big game in a football match. The type of task: different people have different amount of confidence when in different situations. Therefore, what task someone is carrying out will determine their anxiety levels. A fear of evaluation: anxiety can be caused from being judged by others if you fail. A fear of competition importance: a fear of not performing well in an important competition can create anxiety. A fear of injury: this can create anxiety as people want to be able to train and play their sport all the time without being injured. A lack of control of opposition: Such an example of this would be playing against our very high level and fast player in football, such as Messi, and defending against him. Anxiety can have a massive effect on an athlete's performance, and the pressure created can lead to someone overthinking, and not being focused. This will have a negative effect on their performance and lead to a catastrophe. So, anxiety management in sport, deep breaths, which is a somatic um, factor, finding a relaxation, which comes under cognitive, becoming more confident is also linked with cognitive. Practicing the skills to succeed. This can be under somatic and cognitive. Focusing on your own performance is cognitive. Um, Warming up while playing a sport. This will get an athlete ready to perform, and it's somatic as it's physical. Only pay attention to your own. Only pay attention to relative tasks. This is a cognitive. Visual imagery, visualizing how you're going to perform in a certain situation. This is cognitive. Biofeedback is a somatic thing where controlling the heart rate in relation to the breathing rate. It's done through deep breathing, which decreases the heart rate. This technique ensures there's enough oxygen to the muscles when exercising, and allows for a moment of pause and allowing an athlete to regain composure. However, a criticism of this is that a limitation, it takes a lot of time, money, and lots of kit to learn. Positive mental reinforcement is cognitive. Positive reinforcement is mental reinforcement is cognitive. Positive refocus is trying to revert from thinking of negative thoughts and is also cognitive. A limitation to most of these techniques is they can reduce anxiety but cannot be used in a live sporting situation. So stress. Stress is a psychological and physiological state of perceived psychological and physical forces. A stressor is a source of anxiety, is a source that is causing anxiety. Within sport, this can be conflict, competition, and frustration, which are all examples of stressors. Internal stress comes from within. Examples of these would be illness, cognitive anxiety, lack of sleep, over self-critical, and lack of confidence. External stress which is caused by environmental factors. If an environment is too noisy or quiet, a negative social interaction, major life events such as a loss in family, or day-to-day hassle such as travelling to work. Personal stress, which is to do with family, friends, health, finance, lack of satisfaction in the job. Sporting environment, which is the importance of the sporting event and the uncertainty of how you perform in this event. Occupational stress is to do with a job, such as unemployment and not being satisfied with the job. There are two main types of stress. Eustress, which is a good form of stress, which is a feeling of fulfillment. This is shown by some athletes who see stressful situations as they like a challenge. An example of this would be skiing, which is a high-risk sport, but also people gain much satisfaction from it, or doing a big tackle in rugby, or scoring a winning penalty in football. Distress is a negative form of stress, and it's extreme form of anxiety, nervousness, apprehension, or worry as a result of perceived inability to meet demands. Examples of these would be getting an injury, red card, losing a game, or scoring an own goal in football. Stages of stress having a positive effect. So there could be a demand such as winning the last 100 meters in a long race. You will perceive this demand and you will see it as a positive challenge to push yourself. If the arousal levels will be increased and eustress will occur, as which will result in increased energy and motivation. We will then see an increased performance, and when the stages, this is the stages of when it's has a negative effect. There will be a demand, such as scoring a penalty in football, and the perception of this demand can then be negative, thinking you're going to fail and miss this penalty. There'll be then a massive increased arousal and distress, which will result in increased worry. The outcome can then be reduced. The outcome is then a reduced performance. An example of this will be missing a penalty due to too much pressure.